All right, everybody. Welcome to the show. Jeff DeForrest with you here on SportstreamNetwork.com. Flying solo today, my man Jersey Kyle, who lit it up yesterday, lit up the board, literally. There was a steward's inquiry on this man's mental state. But he is off to New Jersey and going to be gallivanting around the Jersey Shore. And all I can say is watch out, women. Because when this man is on the Jersey Shore, he goes through a metamorphosis and actually transforms into a completely different person. And he goes back into the days when he had the good Bobby Sherman hair, the long hair going down the back, playing hoops. You could run full court for a couple of hours, no hassle whatsoever, didn't even need a rest. And he'll be out there invading the Jersey Shore, and hopefully people will be okay. You might want to check the arrest blotters. We're hoping he comes back next week, but we're not sure that's going to happen. In the meantime, I'll take you solo here, and we got a lot of reaction to yesterday's show, which was great. Jory is with us here in the studio, and we welcome back Todd to the program. It's always good to see him. He brought about 7 kids with him. They're all in a pool here outside the studio, which is great. That's one of the luxuries of being able to do a show right out of the old homestead. And it is at home with DeFo, but I don't know that I'm at home with everything that's happening in the world of sports today. I think this is the most comical thing. I got a couple of calls on my radio show, and there's always this question, what level of derangement do you have to be at if you're betting preseason football? Now, there are some theories out there, and one of which I actually thought had some validity to it. I heard this from a guy a long time ago. I was on some handicapping show. I was doing some shyster handicapping show out in New Orleans. I was hosting it. Got roped into it. Didn't realize what level of degeneracy these guys, or actually, just what level they would stoop to induce you to bet on their picks. And they weren't bad handicappers, all in all. They probably hit at about high 50s, 60% rate, which almost anybody would take. What does it take? It takes about 55% to break even once you get by the juice. And if you think about it, what is it that kills everybody in life? It's the juice. If you could pay the juice, you'd be okay, right? Whether it's your mortgage payment, how many times have you looked at it and said, geez, I paid $250 for this house, and by the time I'm done with the bank, it's $700,000. And you're thinking, what is that? Where is that money going? It's all about the juice. So you have to overcome that if you're betting on football. And, of course, in the preseason, this is really for the sickos out there. They put a line on the Hall of Fame game. I saw it was 3 and a hook. And it's Minnesota versus Pittsburgh. And you're thinking, how could you possibly make an assessment about that game? We're going to see a little example tonight of how inept the people are that intend to run this country. And one of our longtime theories, and I think it's a proven theory, is that if the line makers were running this country, there would be no problem. We've expressed this on the show before. Everybody would be rich. Nobody would have any difficulties whatsoever. All your kids would go to college. You wouldn't have them coming out of there after their junior year about 200,000 dimes in debt. And everything would be okay. These guys are remarkable at making numbers and crunching numbers, kind of like the guys I work with on SportstreamNetwork.com. You give them any kind of permutation of mathematical equation, and they'll somehow come out so that your share is 0. That's the way it works. That's the way it should be in life. Everybody should have a company like that. But the point is that the people in Vegas are very hard to beat. You can just look around there. Anytime you see that aerial shot, like I was watching something really stupid last night. Do they really have a World Arm Wrestling League? Is that possible? That may be something that we highlight. That may be our big...
You saw that, what's his name, 60-something years old?
Oh, yeah, I saw like a 90-year-old guy in there trying to arm wrestle. He got pinned right away. But there was really a mismatch in there. It was kind of like watching...
the guy I'm talking about won.
The 60-year-old guy won?
60, bald, crazy face.
Oh, yeah. I think I saw that guy. The guy I was fascinated by in that was this 500-pound guy that won the heavyweight championship. And he was going against a guy that weighed about 250.
He went against Travis.
Right away, it looked like a mismatch, of gigantic proportions. And I'm thinking, whatever I could bet on the 500-pound guy, I want to unload on this. It wouldn't matter if it paid 10 cents on the dollar. You're still going to go out of there making a score. But you're looking at that and thinking to yourself, geez, I mean, there's probably even a line on that. And so, these guys know what they're doing. They take the aerial shot. They show you the shot of Las Vegas. They always show you the same shot. I don't know if it's a static shot that everybody has where they kind of pan in down the Vegas Strip there. And what do you see? You see opulence. You see just excess. You see lights that would run zillions of dollars if you had to pay the electric bill for a half an hour. And you're thinking there's a reason that these guys are able to do that, and that's because nobody can win a bet in the long run. You might win for a little while, you go through some streaks, you have to be very good to beat the people in Las Vegas. And it gets back to this whole thing with the Hall of Fame game. 3 and a hook, Minnesota over Pittsburgh. What do we know about the Hall of Fame game? We know this. Go back, I'm not sure if it was last year or a couple of years ago when the Denver Broncos with Peyton Manning were in the Hall of Fame game, Canton, Ohio. Now, you've already gone through this long ceremony, which obviously you want to pay homage to the greats of the game and the pioneers of the game and the legendary founders of the game. I used to do some work with a group called the Pre-59ers, and to see the level with which they got screwed, what was absolutely fascinating. They had nothing coming, no benefits whatsoever. Guys now are making $400 million on a 3-year contract, and these guys were literally working other jobs to support their interest in playing professional football, and they laid the foundation for this whole thing. So I'm all in on honoring people in the Hall of Fame. There have been some inequities over the years, a couple of guys that you could name right off the top of your head that either don't belong or absolutely should be. They're getting shafted by the Hall of Fame by not getting consideration. One of the guys, actually a decent player here in the era of the Miami Dolphins, the heyday with Dan Marino, Mark Clayton. If you look at his stats and compare him to other receivers, there's no question that this guy stacks up as a Hall of Famer, but for some reason, maybe it was the aspersions and he might have been doing a little bit of the toot. He was out there. They don't like this guy. They don't want to put him in there. Lynn Swann is in there. Lynn Swann did nothing except make one catch. He wasn't a bad receiver, but statistically he doesn't even stack up against Mark Clayton.
Is John Stallworth in there?
Johnny Stallworth, I believe, is a Hall of Famer. And it's always a tough question. And my theory on it, you have the 5-year waiting period, but my theory on it is this. Well, why not decide right away? Because when a guy retires, he either is a Hall of Famer or he's not. There should be no debate. Hey, so-and-so Hall of Famer? Yes or no? It's that simple. I don't know that you need to wait 5 years and then see the other eligible players hanging around. Maybe some guy gets favorable treatment because he was good with the press. And that might have been part of the deal with Mark Clayton. Lynn Swann was obviously very popular. But outside of that business he did on the sideline where his only contribution to the broadcast was they throw it down to him. Cosell might have been doing a game, and they throw it down to Lynn Swann, and he go, "Hey, you see this? Look at these shoes. This is what they're going to have to wear." You would have thought he was talking about mudcocks at the track, as if the cleats that the guys were wearing was going to be the most significant thing that happened in determining the outcome of that game. Now, I would have liked to have booked his action based on that theory alone, but the Hall of Fame game essentially is a joke, and Peyton Manning comes out for the Denver Broncos. I want to say this was a couple of years ago. And you know how he does all that gesturing when he's behind the line of scrimmage there? And you'd think it was like Mick Jagger on Blotter Acid. He's rolling back and forth. He almost morphs into Joe Cocker as he's calling signals, flapping his arms and doing all kinds of weird stuff. And then he tries to draw the guys offside. He gives it a couple of grunts. Hup, hup, hup. And you're asking yourself, hey, come on, Peyton, just snap the freaking football and run a play. And now, if you go back to last year, it's sad to say, but I mean, this guy was throwing passes that looked like they belonged on the old episodes of The American Sportsman. You were waiting for some guy with a duck call and a shotgun to blow that ball right out of the air. At this time, though, he's coming off a series of great seasons. He's setting every record, and he comes in for the Hall of Fame game. And you know this, that the guy's going to play maybe 2 snaps, if that. So in this case, he goes ahead, he breaks the huddle, he gets up to the line of scrimmage, something happens, false start, they don't run a play. He looks over to the sideline. John Fox is coaching the Denver Broncos at the time, and they pull him out of the game. That was it. He didn't even play a single snap, didn't throw a pass, didn't do anything, not even a dump pass over the line of scrimmage. And that's essentially what you got out of the starters in this game. And you're asking yourself, why on earth am I watching this? And then you go beyond that, and you think of the psychotic nature of the people that are betting on a Hall of Fame game. I don't know what inside information you could possibly get that would motivate you to make a wager on this game, but somebody's going to do it, and the people that have the shakes right now, that are jonesing for some action, they're the ones that are going to unload and either take or lay the 3 and a hook with the Minnesota Vikings. And I'm trying to figure out for the life of me, why would any team have any kind of advantage in that game? Guy calls me up and he says, well, Adrian Peterson's back with the team, and he's going to be determined to show that he's all the way back, and that he got screwed last year when he beat the crap out of his child and they suspended him for a season. And I'm thinking, I don't know that he's even going to, why would they even put him in this game? You wouldn't want any of your guys to go out there because it's actually an extra game, and you end up playing 5 preseason games if you're in the Hall of Fame game. So Pittsburgh and Minnesota both are going to have an extra preseason game, and it's an atrocity. And it once again points out the greed and avarice of the National Football League. Now, it's a nice gesture. If that was the only preseason game you played, it would be fine. There's been some steam out there that says, well, geez, they ought to make it 18 regular season games, put more teams in the playoffs, only 2 preseason games, because that's one of the other big and legitimate beefs about the NFL that the fans have, is that why should you buy? You take your best customers. Imagine you do this in any other business. You take your best customers and treat them like clowns. That's what they're doing. They make you buy the season ticket package, also includes the 2 preseason home games. So you're paying for 10 games at regular prices, even though you know that it's a bunch of baloney that you're going to be watching out there. And then a lot of the guys, especially in week 1 of the preseason, and even more so in week 4 of the preseason, when everybody's just trying to bail out and not get anybody hurt, they're trying to set their roster. There might be 1 or 2 borderline decisions that are being made, and yet they're charging you full price to go out and watch this dreck that's taking place on the field. In no way does it resemble a pro football game. It doesn't even represent the likes of a Canadian Football League game. And they're charging you full price for that in the National Football League. And then Roger Goodell will pat you on the back on his way out the door and say, thank you very much. It's almost like going on one of those one-day cruise ships that they have here in South Florida, other places as well, where you go out, as soon as you get to the 3-mile limit, you start playing their slot machines that aren't regulated by anybody. So they're paying off at maybe, I don't even know, do those cruise ship, one-day cruise to nowhere ships, do those machines pay off at anywhere near 50% even? The usual rake is like 2%. They're probably gouging you for 50%. And you go out there, and when the people are saying goodbye to you as you're leaving, they have the whole staff out there. They can't wait to, hey, did you have a good time? Are you coming back? And you go schlumped out of there completely destitute. The only thing that saved you from being completely bored for the 4 hours is the fact that they had an offshore ATM machine that was charging you, speaking of the juice again, probably about $15 to go and get 200 every time you had to go there and re-up as we're getting clobbered on the blackjack tables. Because for some reason too, and this is not meant to cast any aspersions, but they always had what we call in the game the Asian dealer would come in, the cooler would come right to the tables. And they were all Asian dealers, though, on these cruise ships. That was it. You never had a shot with the guy from Brooklyn that just happened to get a job out there in Las Vegas. All it was somebody who have a name tag that said FAM, P-H-A-M. And you're thinking, why don't you just hit me in the face with a waffle iron? I mean, there's no point playing against this woman. She's absolutely going to destroy me. And that was a matter of routine. You guys that go out to Las Vegas or Atlantic City, or now there's casinos universally that have these games and table games, and you're thinking, as soon as they wheel that person in there and it says Wing 2 from Vietnam, it's time to bolt. They're telling you, go have a cup of coffee, go to the bar, get a drink, see if there are any hot chicks over there that you can pick up. But the point of it all being, if you're betting on the Hall of Fame game and you're laying or taking 3 and a hook on the Minnesota Vikings in that game, you really need to check into an asylum for the criminally insane. Because there's no rhyme or reason to it. Now, the one theory that I subscribed to a long time ago, or at least thought it had some validity, was a guy told me on this handicapping show I was doing out in New Orleans that one of the things that you can bank on in the preseason, certain coaches could care less about the results. I don't know how Belichick feels about it, and I'm not sure how applicable it is to guys that are coaching in the game today, because the fans want to believe that it's important that they win these games. They want to believe that, oh yeah, the Dolphins are out there really trying, or that the record has any significance. Teams that go 4-0 in the preseason routinely end up at the bottom of the heap, and teams that go 0-4 are the ones that you see dusting themselves off for 2 weeks at the Super Bowl. So I don't know that there's any great rhyme or reason to it in terms of thinking that, and this is what a coach would tell you, well, we have to establish that winning attitude right now in the preseason. But you're establishing it while your starters are on the bench, so it doesn't make any sense. It can't be both. Either the games are completely unimportant and don't matter except for the safety factor. Maybe you get a little bit of a rhythm going against live action, and it has to be a different speed than playing just against your own guys in practice. But other than that, it's utterly useless, and to try and make sense of it is absolutely absurd. Yet people do it routinely. They do it in baseball with spring training. Nobody pays attention to preseason basketball. All of you fans, you might be diehard puckheads out there. Do you have any idea ever in any year what your hockey team, your local hockey team in the pros, in the NHL, do you have any idea what their record was in the preseason? Nobody knows. So they play those games and they just kind of get the dust off, the ring rust, and get ready for the season. In football, they actually try to make it sound like there's some meaning to these games, including the fact, as I said, that you can wager on them. I don't know that you can, I guess you can wager on anything these days, right? You can wager on whether Jory's going to show up for the show. But as you're looking at the Hall of Fame game...
Don't bet against me.
I wouldn't. No, you're always here. You're always on time. You're great. You're a sure thing. You're a 3 to 5 shot. You're American Pharaoh in a cheap claiming race at Beulah Park. But it just baffles me. And one theory that I heard, though, Marv Levy a long time ago, he was coach of the Buffalo Bills, took him to 4 straight Super Bowls. Obviously, he was sensational with his regular season record for the most part. He had some great players on that team. I mean, defensively, speaking of the Hall of Fame, you had the great Bruce Smith. You got Jim Kelly, a Hall of Famer. You had great wide receivers on those clubs. Terrific linemen, both sides of the ball.
Andre Reed.
Yeah, I mean, just great teams. Lofton.
Thomas.
Yeah, they had terrific players. Great running back in Thurman Thomas, which brings up another interesting debate that we can get into here on the program. And he never cared about the preseason. He didn't give a flying one about the preseason. He would routinely go 0-4 every year with those Bills teams. He pulled all of his starters. He just wanted to get through it. And so that was the one time you might be able to see a preseason trend that you could buy into. And he would do it year after year. So it was like an annuity. It was kind of like betting the over in the Pro Bowl in any sport. But the preseason games are hysterical, and this Hall of Fame game is absolutely a sham once they get out there on the field. And to even make a line on it, you would have to think that there would be some kind of SEC investigation into the people in Las Vegas for even putting a number out there on that game. But it's one thing, you want to bet your buddy when you're in the stands there, a hot dog and a beer. But to unload all kinds of cash on this game at 3 and a hook is absolutely ridiculous. And you won't even see the starting quarterback for Minnesota, Bridgewater, if he takes 6 snaps. That's what the number should be. Over under 6 and a hook. Number of snaps that Teddy Bridgewater and or especially Roethlisberger, I can't imagine that does he even suit up for this ball game. And they're trying to attach some importance to it. And of course the NFL would try to sell you on the fact that, oh yeah, this has a ton of meaning. I mean, this is going to make all the difference in the world. So we have that to look forward to. There's some controversy, though, with the Hall of Fame, and it's one that I'm hard-pressed to explain. As in 2010, and I don't remember the name of the player, but there was a guy who was inducted into the Hall of Fame and ended up dying, and he was inducted posthumously into the Hall of Fame. Now, they have several people that are going to make speeches. It's routine, and I kind of like it. I mean, if I was going to watch Hall of Fame ceremonies, I want to see the induction speeches of these guys. And I don't mind. I like it. Dan Marino had his kid induct him, be the guy that gave the speech. You see guys that have their good friends, other players, their head coaches. Parcells introduces guys. And I find that to be the interesting. I'm a big fan of sports stories, so I kind of like that whole storyline of having somebody as the inductee, and they give the speech, and then the other guy gets up there, whoever it is, if it's Lawrence Taylor, and they're shedding tears, and they give a very emotional speech about how much the game has meant to them, and then they go right off the premises and get arrested. when Taylor was inducted into the Hall of Fame, wasn't it like a day later he was in some motel in upstate New York with some 16-year-old? I didn't know she was 16. She told me she was 17. Okay. Thanks a lot, LT. We love LT, too. I mean, a guy with some serious dementia in terms of, if anybody could be an example of a guy who had demons, it would be that guy. But with Seau, I mean, obviously he's got a lawsuit coming as part of this lawsuit against the National Football League that has yet to really been decided. The judge in the case threw it out. They were giving these players $70 million or some outrageous sum of money, you would have thought, and very punitive against the National Football League, and blaming them completely in a settlement for ignoring the fact that guys were getting hit in the head. I'll never forget this. I used to cover a guy named Ricky Bell, who was a running back, part of a big run of running backs at USC. They had O.J. Simpson, Marcus Allen, Charles White, Ricky Bell, and a host of others, just one after another. They dominated in terms of putting great running backs out there on the field. And Ricky Bell was playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I believe. And he just gets crushed. I mean, a head-to-head hit. This was before anybody talked about it. And I remember, and this is how it was treated at the time. The announcers, even in the booth, the network announcers, they just summarily dismissed this and said, "Oh, look at that! Ricky had his bell rung," using the play on words on the fact that that was his last name. And you thought that we used to laugh it off, right? Nobody paid any attention to this whole concussion issue in the National Football League. Hell, for a long time they played with leather helmets, but. Seau obviously has a legitimate case and a cause, and it's a devastating one if you think about it. There's should be some consideration given to the idea that maybe pro football shouldn't even be sanctioned in the United States. It's far and away the most violent game. I've seen and been around boxing my whole life, and you see boxers that have taken big beatings in the ring. You're laughing.
I'm laughing because you got a message here from the mixture.
Oh, yeah?
It says wine with a question mark. It says, tell him bet the gray horse.
Don't know what that means exactly, but we're glad people are paying attention and they're trying to get a hold of us. But anyway, the whole concussion thing obviously is a very sensitive issue for the National Football League. I think they would rather talk about Deflategate. They would rather see Tom Brady at halftime take a machete and cut a ball in half than have somebody address the issue, especially under these circumstances. The sanctimony in Canton, Ohio, the Hall of Fame, everybody's there, whole world's watching, and you're going to have somebody stand up and say, well, my dad committed suicide because you guys ignored the whole issue of concussions for years and pimped off him and his talents to make money. Nobody cared about the issue, and you should be paying all kinds of penance for this. In fact, there should be a movement on to shut down the league and not allow this to go on any further. I mean, talk about guys that are capitalizing on violence. There's nobody doing it more than the NFL. You could talk about Don King, Dana White, Bob Arum. Nobody's making more money cashing in on violence than Roger Goodell and all of the owners, the 32 owners in the National Football League. So they don't want to make a big stink about this. So somehow they invoked a rule that was not actually made by the National Football League. It was made under completely different circumstances by the people who run the Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. And they decided a few years ago when this guy, it was 2010, whoever it was inducted, and he had a couple of guys give speeches, and I don't know, to a lesser degree, they kind of pulled a Jim Valvano, and he made a brilliant speech. Let's face it, that might be, ranking third in the pecking order compared to the Lou Gehrig speech and maybe a couple of others. I might put Allen Iverson talking about practice up there, although that was kind of a comedy. But and feel free to message in some questions here on the show, because I'm just rambling here about preseason football and having a good time with you with that. But yes,
Steele's Fudge.
Steele's Fudge wants to know something. Yes.
Steele's Rich Pletner wants to know. First off, he said he loves the new Sportstream Network sign.
It's a big improvement from that thing that we had on the bubblegum wrapper.
Make sure that you forwarded that message to Kyle so he knows where to go to pick up.
Oh, I did not yet, but I will. I figured you had sent that to him.
I don't
but
have Kyle's.
There's an address. It basically said, meet us in a back alley. There'll be like a drug deal going on over there. And
a basket of fudge on the other side.
And the guy's got fudge. It kind of reminded me of a time I was in Chicago with one of my fine sponsors, the great Jim Dunn of JM Lexus, universally the number one Lexus dealership in the world. And he's with another guy named Jimmy, who they're both from Chicago, and they have ties there. And all of a sudden, we're driving, we went to go see the Dolphins play the Bears. And at the time, the Bears were 7-0, and the whole city of Chicago was all excited. They thought they were going to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman. So the Dolphins come in there, and they're kind of having modest success at that point in the season, somewhere slightly above 500. They had great players on the team there, and if you'll remember, going back, Jason Taylor had an insane game against the Chicago Bears, and Rex Grossman was finally exposed as a fraud. I'll never forget this game because we had a couple of tickets that were in a good spot and a couple of tickets that were high up, deep in the nosebleed. And they had reconfigured Soldier Field. And it looked like a spaceship in some kind of moon landing. Some kind of Martians were going to get off this thing. And sure enough, I'm in the upper deck, up against the back wall. You needed a rope ladder to climb to your seat. And I get up there, and I look down. You're almost feeling a little bit dizzy and lightheaded. And then I realized how high up I was when the Blue Angels did a flyover. It was a military commemoration day. They were doing this all around the National Football League, as well they should. And the Blue Angels were beneath me when they were doing the flyover. So it was kind of a weird feeling. But anyway, in that particular game, the Dolphins won. Jason Taylor picked off Rex Grossman 3 times. And then after the game, my buddy Jim Dunn and his friend Jimmy says, okay, we're going to go and we're going to go make a little transaction. I'm thinking, what are these guys into? We drive into the worst neighbor in Chicago I've ever seen. Guys, you would be preferable if you were in a slaughterhouse, getting ready to be the next piece of meat that went up for grabs, more so than being in this neighborhood. You would have to figure, literally, dead meat was the only way to describe the condition that you were going to be in. So we go, and it's nighttime, and we pull over, finally, and there's a guy there in kind of an ugly car, looked like it had been fished out of the ocean, all rusty and kind of an unsavory-looking character, if you will. And they go, hey, you got it? And we're like, got what? And sure enough, I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe it. All these years, I thought this guy was completely reputable. Here I am. I'm stuck making a drug deal in some back alley in Chicago. And sure enough, this guy was selling them sausage out of the trunk of his car. And it was the finest sausage that you would ever have. And they went way out of their way to get this and then bring it back here to South Florida. So you just never know, what kind of thing that you're walking into. But they may be walking into it. I don't know if they're going to walk into a brick. When now Junior Seau's, the controversy centered around Junior Seau's daughter, and they didn't want Junior Seau's daughter to make a speech, or so we thought. But now the story comes to pass that this was a rule that was made because this guy in 2010, whoever made the induction speech for him, even though he was deceased, actually went through every detail of his life and was up there for about 5 hours. People were passing out. They were throwing matzo balls at this guy. They were ready to just yank him off the stage with any kind of vaudevillian type of hook that you could find. And so they actually instituted this rule that instead of having, there's no love for the dead guy. He's an easy guy to blame stuff on, right? You always blame it on the dead guy. Something happens, goes wrong. Oh yeah, that's Jaddy's fault. He's dead. I don't know what we can do about that. So yeah, they don't want the dead guy to bring down the ceremony. And in this case, it's Junior Seau. I don't mean to minimize or marginalize what Junior Seau meant to the world of football and the football fans around the world, and especially the people in San Diego. But they didn't want his. The theory was that they didn't want his daughter or his family to speak because they would no doubt get up there and pull like a Michael Moore at the Oscars. The guy from what was that? Fahrenheit 451 and Bowling for Columbine. The weirdo producer that goes in there, does those documentaries where he makes like Charlton Heston look like a fool. Some of them are well done, but we've come to find out that even Michael Moore is a bit of a charade. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit of show business in you, that's for sure. So, he gets up at the Oscars, and naturally he takes that as a political platform, and it's inappropriate. It happened a couple of times in sports. We've seen it, where I remember one press conference with Jimmy Calhoun, the coach of Connecticut, UConn, and some guy had an agenda. He's been doing a bunch of negative pieces about Jim Calhoun. I'm sure you could find many skeletons in this man's closet, many indiscretions, lots of things. I mean, he was always under suspicion that he was doing something, getting these superstars to come and line up at UConn. Actually, I don't know that he had the upper echelon superstars, but always had very solid players, and he had a lot of them. And there was a guy that had an agenda from like public radio or whatever, trying to do some piece out of the hippy-dippy era that, who doesn't know this, that the coaches at these universities are the highest paid people at the school. Calhoun, I don't even know what he was making at the time. It was a relatively low number by today's standards, but he had some sneaker deal and this, that, and the other thing. And guy gets up at the press conference and he says, are you aware, how do you feel about this, Coach Calhoun, that you're the highest paid state employee that we have in Connecticut? And Calhoun snapped back at him, and you thought, well, it's kind of an inappropriate question. If you can't get this guy to talk to you one-on-one, there are probably other venues that you could use or other means that you could use if you really wanted to get Jim Calhoun to answer this question. But the guy's there talking about a loss to Indiana, and I don't know that you really should bring your separate agenda to nail this guy to the cross. I mean, we all know what the deal is in sports. Let's face it. These guys are going to be the highest paid state employees, however irrational that may seem, that we're placing winning basketball games and championships above an education, or some guy that's brilliant in the philosophy or the chemistry department, or somebody that's actually written and had journals about finding cures for cancer, yeah, of course they're being abused salary-wise by comparison to what's going on in sport. But let's face it, I mean, that's going to be the case forever in college sports, especially until they finally get around to paying the players. What other business has a deal like this where you're in show business and you're making jillions of dollars, multi-billions of dollars every season, and you don't have to pay the guys that are doing the work for you? That's a great premise. You would want to subscribe to that all day long.
It's what we're basing our stuff on.
Well, we're hoping one of your other networks hits it big. That would be a big asset for us, that's for sure. But anyway, the whole point of it being that the NFL was perceived to be the ones that were locking out Junior Seau's daughter from speaking at the Hall of Fame, and that the conditions, the rules were put in place in 2010. Most people feel this way, like we've seen. I mean, the rules could be changed in a moment by Roger Goodell. One day he's talking about suspending a guy for 2 games. Next, he's taking his whole career down. I mean, it seems, you talk about arbitrary selection. That's kind of how they've been doing things in the National Football League. So you would think if they had some obscure rule about speaking at Hall of Fame induction ceremonies, what would it take? An act of God to get that to change so they could allow Junior Seau's family to properly pay homage to him as he's inducted into, enshrined into the Hall of Fame. This isn't even this is enshrinement, my friends. And his memory should last forever. The guy was a hell of a player. Although you could see some of the problems that he was having. I remember that retirement speech he gave. Was that the most bizarre thing? We were talking about Tom Brady turning into Phil Spector at his trial, but you really had to wonder what was up with Junior Seau, because he was literally speaking in tongues. I think he did half the press conference in Hebrew when he was announcing his retirement. And then he came back, and he came back like a couple of times. So obviously he was loopy. He was seeing big green men crawling on the wall whenever he went to bed. And I don't know, there was a price to pay. And unfortunately, it was this massive depression that led him to go ahead and commit suicide. Either that, yes.
Who are these other 2 guys that, Wolf, these other guys that are being inducted?
Oh, I don't even know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wolf.
The one who made the trade for
George Wolf.
The one who made the trade for Favre.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't question the worthiness of any of these guys going in there, and it's funny too because
football, only 21 non-players have been inducted.
Yeah. Well, and one of them we know very well, the lovely and talented Leslie Visser, who's in the only woman in the National Football League Hall of Fame. So it's obviously meaningful. You would think they would want Seau's family to get up there and speak, that they would find some way around whatever this quirky rule is that they've instituted in 2010, because they had one guy, like I am here, I mean, just schlubber on and on and on and on. And the people, they were falling asleep in the crowd. It really diminished the impact of the ceremony. So they said, okay, from now on, anybody who's dead is going to be introduced by some kind of videotape. That's how they're going to go into the Hall of Fame. Now, they've made an exception. They're going to allow Seau's daughter to speak. And apparently, from all information that we can gather, she is very respectful of the whole process, has no intention to go ahead and deal with her own personal agenda, and is not going to stand up there and say, "You guys killed my father," which would be kind of inappropriate, you would think, since it's kind of a celebration. So I think it'll go well. It's a big controversy that seems to be somehow, finally squelched by the idea that the NFL is going to allow her to speak. She's not going to do the actual induction speech. She's going to have 10, 15 minutes or whatever to go ahead and say her piece about her father. I think it's something that really should be awarded and accorded to the family, because, after all, this is a very emotional time for them, and the enshrinement is something that they're going to have forever as a memory of Junior Seau and what he meant to them. And apparently, outside of the fact that he was seeing 3 people every time he woke up in the morning, he was a very good guy, and obviously a great player, and a great example of what the NFL would like all of its players to be. So that's taking place this Sunday. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I'm happy the NFL capitulated to allow Junior Seau's daughter to speak. I don't know that I'm going to lay the 3 on a hook with Minnesota in the Hall of Fame game. I would think, literally, you're bordering on pure lunacy if you're even considering that for a second. I don't think we'll be able to decipher anything from the game. Everything gets underway the following week, And of course, we'll be making very bold assessments on what the possibilities are for various teams in the NFL based on the very thing I was just talking about, which was that these games are played under conditions that render them meaningless. So I don't know that you can draw any great definitive conclusions from watching preseason football, but it all gets underway on Sunday with the Hall of Fame game. We'll get to see Roethlisberger trot out there, wave to the crowd. Does he hand the ball off on his one snap? I think he does. He just hands the ball off to some running back. Maybe even gives it to, the owner of the team, one of the Roonies. They carry it for 2 yards in the line of scrimmage. Hey, Art, you going to give up the ball or what? And you know what would be great? I mean, this would be a good thing. If the NFL had a little sense of humor about itself, they would take the first snap in the Hall of Fame game, and the official would grab the ball, and you're thinking that would be to commemorate it and put it into, the annals there, the hallways in Canton, Ohio. And instead, they would take out a pin or some kind of measuring device and see if it was see if it was inflated to the right levels of pounds per square inch, and just have a big laugh on this whole thing. And then say, you know what? We're also announcing that we're going to go ahead and abdicate the suspension of Brady. He's going to play against the Steelers on opening night. So make sure you tune in and make sure you buy all the products that we're advertising on TV. DeForrest with you here on SportstreamNetwork.com. Flying solo today, the great Jersey Kyle Martinez back with us next week. We appreciate the input. If you were messaging into the show, we'll answer all of your questions in the next segment of the program. Be with you until about 5:30 tonight. And we're going to take a short break and come back with more in a moment on SportstreamNetwork.com. All right. That was about a 40-minute rant there, my friend.
39 minutes. You're good.
All right, welcome back. Ready to go here. Take you up until about 5:30 here on SportstreamNetwork.com. Jeff DeForrest, Jersey Kyle, on vacation. He squadoozled his way all the way back to the Jersey Shore. A maniac. I don't know what this is. I'm not big on long-distance driving anymore. Maybe because it's, I hit that will you still need me, will you still feed me number of 64. My idea of driving is taking a limo to the airport. If I'm going to go to another city, I don't know that I want to jump in a car. I got two friends that are on the road at the same time. George the Animal Steel, great guy. And we've road tripped together a couple of times. We actually did drive all the way to Louisville, Kentucky to break our cherry, if you will, watching the Kentucky Derby or going to the Kentucky Derby. I don't know that it was on my bucket list. I'm not sure that it's safe for me to make a bucket list, because my number's been blinking on the board for a long time. Not sure how long I'm going to make it, so it would be kind of useless to go here and start writing down, well, I'd like to go here, I'd like to go there, whatever. And a lot of people with sports have different ideas of what they would like to do. Maybe they want to visit every stadium. They want to go see a game at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Fenway Park was one of my ideas that, hey, how do I live a whole life as a sports fan and never see a game at Fenway Park? And of course, with our crowd, racetracks are a very significant destination. Usually most trips and vacations are planned around the ability and the convenience of being able to bet horses, which, by the way, will drive women crazy. They hate that. They want to know. The first question a woman will ask you after a while of being with a sick, degenerate horse player is there a track there? And now, you don't even need to be at a track. You can bet this stuff over your telephone. But I'm still like old school on this. I at least like to be in a simulcasting facility. But, different things. In this case, their bucket list, it wasn't so much bucket list, but just their desire and entertainment is to be at various racetracks. Saratoga open right now. Now, it's funny. I grew up in New York. I lived there the first 22 years of my life. I've been back there several times since, not too frequently, but at one time I was making maybe a semi-annual trip back to New York City. I covered a lot of sporting events there and got there pretty frequently in the mid-'90s, and never did I get to Saratoga. Never. Diehard racing fan since I can remember. I remember reading the race results in the Herald Tribune in the third grade. And never, for some reason, it seemed too much of a burden to drive from Long Island, where I lived and grew up. It was probably a 3.5-hour, 4-hour schlep up there to Saratoga. To go there, take a pounding at the time, $100 was a big amount of money. Lose a stick and then have to drive 4.5 hours back. Too depressing. I think I'd rather play Russian roulette. But I finally got the opportunity to go there, and I could see every reason why people make this part of their annual social itinerary. You hear people all the time asking you if you're at various racetracks, hey, you going to Toga? So George the Animal Steel is on his way to Saratoga. We had taken a nice little road trip in April to Keeneland, which I went to for the first time. And you see Keeneland on TV when you're watching races on TV, and you're thinking, yeah, that looks like a great place to go. But I can assure you, once you go there, you'll realize it's even better than your wildest dreams. And that's kind of how Saratoga was. I finally got a chance to go there about 4 years ago when, oddly, a good friend of mine, the great Bob Knuth, known as the Duke of Dade County here in South Florida, let us use his private jet because he was going somewhere else, and he'd flown us up to Boston for his wedding to the lovely and talented Leslie Visser, and he said, you know what, if you guys want to take a side trip to Albany, I'll have my pilot, Eddie, drop you off there, wait with the plane, you guys go to the track, come back, and then they'll fly you home to Miami all in the same day. And it turned out to be one of the greatest days. I didn't win any money that day. I don't know that I got stung too badly, but you could see why they had such a great appreciation and why people just gravitate towards doing this on a regular basis. Obviously, you get a lot of celebrities and stars going out there. Same thing, Del Mar in California. But nothing quite like Saratoga, and it would be one of those destinations to be on your bucket list, but I can't see driving there from here. It'd be, at least a 24-hour schlep up to Saratoga, and that's what George Animal Steel, our buddy, is doing. So, I mean, credit to him for having that kind of passion for the game to go out there, and obviously he's going to stay for a little while, about a week, but I don't know about jumping in the car and making one of those long-distance drives, and that's what our good buddy Jersey Kyle is doing. Driving with kids in the car, well, grown kids, but kids in the car, all the way past south of the border, all the way to the Jersey Shore, where he's going to spend a week. And you know what's going to happen? He's going to get bored after about half a day and say, straight off to Monmouth Park. But we had that feeling. I got to Fenway. I don't know. I've never been to Wrigley Field. That would be one of the destinations that you would think would be on just about any sports fan's bucket list. And Lambeau in the cold. I don't know. Chicago Stadium was cool. I mentioned the trip there, and that was good. And outside of that, I don't know. Well, what are the great sporting destinations that you feel like you absolutely have to have a chance to gravitate towards? Always something that people consider, and a lot of people like to make a whole big deal and a trip out of it. But bunch of stuff coming up, and along those lines, I wanted to bring up great places that have closed. Not always. I mean, with all of this money that's on the table for new stadiums, and it's all a game it's owners taking a money grab, fleecing some municipality. They always make it sound like it's going to be for, well, this is really going to help out the neighborhood here because we're going to do all kinds of improvements. And they have the stadium bordering on some barrio or some ghetto. And, the people there are thinking, oh, this is great. We're going to have new housing here, and it's going to be affordable, and they're going to clean everything up, and they're going to sweep the glass off the streets there, put some basketball courts in, tennis, whatever. We'll have a golf course. And none of that ever comes to pass. I mean, 0.0 Blutarsky numbers on that. None of it ever actually happens because the municipality, whatever city it happens to be that's building a facility, ends up forking over some ridiculous amount of money that has them swimming in a sea of red ink that is larger than the Asian Sea. And none of the improvements in the neighborhood ever take place. And then within 15, 20 years, the ownership of whatever team it happens to be, even if it's not the same, they start whining and complaining, saying, hey, we need a new ballpark, man. We're not going to be able to make it here. If you want a good competitive team, you're going to have to put up the money to go ahead and help us out, build a facility, and then every favorable revenue stream is going to have a direct pipeline into our pockets. Happened here in South Florida with the Marlins. And I bring this up because the Nassau Coliseum is closing on Long Island, and there are still people that will want to go there, even though the place is just an outright dump. And so the Islanders are moving to Brooklyn, and they're still apparently going to be the Islanders because they've somehow defined it that Brooklyn is actually an island. I don't know, it's connected by like a Kanish to some other piece of land. But the Nassau Coliseum is going down, and there'll be people that lament the fact that this place is finally going to be destroyed and knocked down, and that there are not going to be any games there anymore and no more opportunities to go there. It was the same thing here with the Orange Bowl. People still cry today to me on the radio shows I do. Hey, you know why the Dolphins are losing? Because they don't play at the Orange Bowl anymore. No atmosphere there at the new stadium, which, by the way, that's going through a $400 million renovation right now, supposedly at the expense of the owner, but there's always that one piece of paper that somehow slips through, and some politician that you later see during the perp walk because, due to various systems of bribery and payoffs. And I don't know, I'm not saying that's the case here, because this Stephen Ross, who owns the Dolphins, seems to be, I mean, he might be insane in thinking that the team's going to win the Super Bowl this year, but he seems to be a relatively decent guy. He's supposedly putting all this money up himself to renovate this stadium and have it get up to speed. And from everything I've seen, and it's not going to be completed this year, this place is going to be dynamite by the time they're done. Another example of the, if you will, greed and avarice again of the National Football League, because there were like 2 drops of rain, well actually it was a monsoon, during a Super Bowl here several years ago, which involved, right, the Chicago Bears and the Colts, did it not? That was the one Super Bowl that Peyton Manning was able to win. And his one championship. Otherwise, this guy looks like dog meat when it comes, he's answering the same stupid question as Dan Marino. Hey, Danny, how come you never won squat? Greatest passer of all time, my ass. That's the kind of thing that would have been thrown at Peyton Manning if he hadn't won that one Super Bowl game. And I don't know if he wins it if it isn't pouring out. But Goodell, who wasn't even commissioner at the time, says, that's it. You've had 10 Super Bowls here in South Florida. This, without question, and I've been to a zillion different sites for the Super Bowl, just about all of them. This, without question, is the best place that you could ever stage this event. it was a joke a couple of years ago when they had it up in New York. Just absolutely a joke. There's nothing to do in Arizona except pick cactus pins out of your shoulder every time you stand up and take a breath. You're running into some kind of desert wind that knocks you out. Nothing to do in any of these places that compares with South Florida, where you can go to the beach, be outside. I mean, people want to be in the sunshine. They're coming from Green Bay, for God's sake, in the middle of the winter. You think they want to go to New York City where it's 35 degrees?
I have to address every question, even if it's directed at me.
Yes.
Through you.
Okay.
Steele's Fudge sent a message, Rich Bletner, saying, hey, Mr. DeFo, does Jory still date hairy-legged women?
That's a question I'm not sure that I'm equipped to answer. And there's certain... do I have my cell phone here? Let me call Louis Lipschitz, my attorney. I'll see if there's certain legal ramifications, Mr. the people from Steele's Fudge, for
Mr. Pletner.
Mr. Pletner, for answering that question. I don't know that I can. But anyway, yeah, it's a shame. I mean, when these old venues go down, if you were a fan of them, I was a big fan of the Olympic Auditorium out in Los Angeles, built in 1932 for the 32 Olympic Games. And obviously a decrepit, antiquated piece of crap as a facility, but it had character. And that's something that a lot of people feel is missing from some of these modern-day facilities. And you look around, and I guess, it also opens up another excuse to rob the public when they go in there. As we were talking about the other day, used to look forward to getting a hot dog and a beer. It cost you $1.50. Now, $17.50 later, you got a lousy hot dog and a watered-down beer. And everybody's telling you, yeah, but look at the stadium. Look at your seats. They're fantastic.
I miss the old Orange Bowl.
See, you're another one of these Orange Bowl guys. I remember walking into the Orange Bowl for the first time, and there's a roadway system here called the Golden Glades Interchange, which looks like it was designed by a madman. This guy had to be on a form of drug that even Dennis Rodman has never ingested in his lifetime. And I'm thinking the only guy that could have designed the infrastructure of the Orange Bowl was somebody that obviously had flunked out of any architectural school, and it looked like it was going to fall down. It looked like it was going to collapse when it was in its heyday. So I didn't have any problem with that when they got rid of the Orange Bowl.
Do you remember back in the day when behind the goalpost they actually had an aquarium?
They had the little swimming pool, the above-ground pool, like it was in one of those row houses in Queens.
Right.
You're on the Long Island Railroad going to New York City or back the other way, and they got the laundry hanging from a small house that looks a little bit decrepit itself, and there's one of those above-ground pools, and that's the big thing. That's it looks like you made it. You feel like you're Steve Wynn if you have one of those. And they had one in the open end of the end zone, and of course they had Flipper, right?
Right, Flipper.
Was it the actual Flipper?
I don't know. But
that would be coming under the heading of animal cruelty. I think they were dunking Dolphin Denny in there. Yeah, they had the dolphin jumping up and down.
Right.
Yeah.
One last question.
Yes.
It's on an entirely different subject.
Uh-oh.
But since Kyle's not here, I'm interviewing.
Okay.
There's been a couple questions about what do you think about Mayweather
and Berto
for his...
farewell swan song fight.
His farewell fight, taking the record.
I don't know how they can sell this. I really don't. It shows you that the general public out there is so gullible. They're going to buy into this. You would have to think that after that last Pacquiao disaster, this is going to be a tough sell. I would imagine we'll see Bob Arum crying sometime, and I don't think they'll cancel this fight. Obviously, they're going to do it, and they're going to sell it like he's going for history. He's 49-0 right now, and Rocky Marciano, of course, retired at 49-0. So this would be 50-0 for Floyd Mayweather Jr. It's a shame, because if you saw Mayweather 15 years ago, the guy was great. And he's still good enough to make this boring style of his work. But as a boxing fan, it's hard to watch it, and it's hard to embrace a guy as an opponent that already lost to Victor Ortiz, who made a fool of himself against Mayweather, and Robert the Ghost Guerrero, who also lost by a blowout to Mayweather. Probably of the guys that have challenged Mayweather recently, Guerrero, surprisingly, was the worst and least effective opponent.
And when you go back in history and you look at the guys that are the staple of boxing from that weight class, Hagler, Duran, Leonard, Wilfredo Benitez, and even a little lighter.
Legendary guys, yeah.
Mancini, Alexis Arguello. You say to yourself, was there ever that moment in Mayweather's career.
Yeah, he had a few.
Saw him actually have to really dig deep. Because
I've seen a few Mayweather fights. I mean, he was so superior that even when he was fighting good guys, he actually used to knock them out back in the day. And he was great. Fastest hands you've ever seen. Best defense that we've seen in boxing, maybe in history. And still exhibiting it today. Think about it. He had to slow down tremendously from his prime, and yet you still rarely see anybody make contact with him. If he takes one shot, everybody gets crazy. Oh, look at that, Mayweather's shaking. But truth of the matter is he rarely gets hit, and very little damage has been done. In this run for the 6-fight, $250 million contract, they barely laid a glove on this guy in 6 fights. This was the easiest money a man could ever make, and then on top of that, he gets the cream puff of generating $300 million for himself when he fought Manny Pacquiao, and Pacquiao brought nothing. He is fighting with one arm. He was like the one-arm man in The Fugitive, and he couldn't really do much.
But you would have thought that was a fight that Mayweather
it looked like it.
would have buckled down and knocked him out.
And maybe he tried, yeah. No, he's not inclined to do that. And that's why this Berto fight is going to be especially boring, because Berto takes a pretty good punch, so there's no way Mayweather knocks him out. It's going to be 12 rounds of the same old stuff. And you're going to see the same thing, too. It'll be 8-4, 9-3. Mayweather, all scorecards from the judges who have been paid off, and then Mayweather probably a fight, maybe one more time. Maybe the public is so gullible in boxing, they'll bring back Pacquiao and fight Mayweather-Pacquiao again, and people will buy it. All right, we got to buy some dinner tonight, so we're going to get out of here. It's been a pleasure being with you. Jory, thanks. Todd back on the scene. Always a pleasure to see him. Appreciate all the people who tuned in, fired off questions, sent Jory personal messages, and we'll do it again tomorrow from Gulfstream Park and have a lot of fun. We should have some special guests for you. And until then, I'm Jeff DeForrest. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time right here on SportstreamNetwork.com.